When should we start investing?
I think the biggest show of love that you can do for your child is by planning early for their future.
What do you think are the financial goals a parent should have?
Financial goal means a very big ticket purchase for which you need to plan for early. Right? It's not something that you can just fork out from your salary.
How fast can we start making our first investment?
Starting your first investment within 15 minutes.
Tax-saving mutual funds that parents can look at.
Over 5,000 funds in the country. Whenever in doubt, go for an index fund. So you're basically not just betting on a particular fund, but you're betting on the growth of the Indian economy as a whole. And in India, for example, inflation is 6%. But did you know that inflation in your college education is about...
Hello and welcome to the Modern Indian Parent Podcast, the podcast that is redefining parenting in Indian families. I am Rinie Gupta, I'm a pediatric sleep consultant, and every week we bring you episodes that will help you own your modern parenting choices, even if Nani and Dadi don't agree with them. The topic for today's conversation is something that every parent has on their mind. What can I do to secure my child's future? There is no denying that having kids is expensive. From the day that you find out that you're pregnant to the time that they're born, and every year after that, there are so many expenses that we need to take care of. But few of the biggest expenses that you will incur in your child's life are actually going to come 18 years down the road when they're gearing up for university. And this is something that parents have to be prepared for from an early age. And today we have a very special guest with us, who's not only a SEBI-certified financial expert, but also the co-founder of one of India's fastest growing financial robo-advisor companies, CashVisory. He is Utkarsh Chaudhary. And trust me, he is the best person to go to because he simplifies the complex world of finances for everybody to understand. I have actually known him since my university days. We went to the same university, which is Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. And even though he was doing engineering back then, he made a 360-degree turn, went to the world of personal finances, and has just shone in this industry. So without further ado, let's welcome him on board so he can give you the most amazing tips, tricks, and every single tool that you need to be able to secure your child's future. Hello and welcome, Utkarsh. Thank you for coming on our show. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me here today, Rinie. You guys have been doing such a phenomenal job with your podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm great. How are you doing yourself?
I am doing wonderful as well. I'm so excited to learn so many things about managing our finances and securing our children's future. I also just want to give a shout out to your podcast. Everybody who's listening to the Modern Indian Parent, you have to check out the CashVisory podcast. I'm going to link it right up over here. And they talk about such amazing financial advice that I feel all adults should have. It should literally be taught in school. But since we were not taught that in school, why don't we check out the CashVisory podcast instead and learn about investments and growing your wealth and everything to do with managing our personal finances. So today's conversation is going to be super interesting. But before we get into all the questions that I have for you as a mom as well, can we please talk about how did you get into financial advising? I mean, I was just telling everyone that I met you in university, you were doing engineering back then, and now you're a financial advisor. And then you went on and you co-founded CashVisory. Tell us about your journey, please.
Right. So I think where do I start? I think university might be a great place to start, right? Because as you mentioned, I did engineering there and I was far away from personal finance or finance in general, just like any other engineering grad. And that was kind of a struggle for me in the early days, to be very honest. So I started working, but one thing that I did back then was just let my money sit in the bank. That's still my biggest regret till date because I think I missed out on the biggest compounding opportunity of my life. And there was such a big bull run going on in the market. I wish I'd invested my money right when I started working. But this is what happens to most of us. And that sort of continued happening for the next 3 years. From there, my career went in a few different directions. I went from engineering to B2B sales to B2C sales. And then I was like, okay, if I'm trying all of these things out, why not learn about finance? So I started self-educating myself. As my interest developed, I realized that why not put some more structure into place? So I started doing a few courses on finance. I realized that why don't I get certified as a financial advisor? And that was a totally game-changing experience for me because I realized that that's truly my calling, right? And from a part-time gig, it became a full-time gig. And the rest is history. I did that for 4 years in Singapore, managed 200 over clients, managed millions of dollars in AUM for them. And while working in the financial services industry, I started seeing the gaps that are there in the industry very clearly. And my co-founder Arpita was my colleague there. we realized that financial advisory really has not been solved for young people. And that is what prompted us to start working on CashVisory.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. You're right. Like, you only think about getting a financial advisor if you feel like you've got a pretty big sum of money and you're like, okay, now, I don't know what to do with this. So let me seek outside counsel to understand how can I grow this. But somebody who's just starting off, they're maybe saving a few $100, a few thousand rupees every month. They're like, why should I invest in a financial advisor? And I'm guessing that's exactly the hole that CashVisory is plugging and is solving that exact issue.
So yeah, precisely, and this is the problem that me and Arpita had faced firsthand ourselves. Like when we sort of are relatively early in our career, people in their 20s and their 30s, we don't really have a credible source to guide us. There are good advisors out there, but they're very much focused on people who already have money. And then we went a bit deeper, and our aha moment was we conducted a survey with over 2,000 individuals. We asked them just two questions. The first question was, how many of you have a demat account? So about 60% said yes. The second question was, how many of you have gone in and made your first investment? So then that number dropped to 20%. So there's a 40% delta of these people who really want to start investing, but they just haven't had the confidence to click that invest now button. So we wanted to solve this problem. So we got ourselves licensed under SEBI. We don't work on any commissions. And we are really, really trying to ensure that we get every single Indian household to their first investment.
Wow, that sounds like such an amazing goal to work towards. Because you're right, taking that first step, pulling your money out of your bank where you know it's the most secure, and you take that money out and you put it into an investment instrument, you need to have a lot of confidence in doing that. And then if
Absolutely.
people like you are able to give us that confidence by giving us the right advice, I'm sure so many more people will be open to investing instead of just letting their money sit in the bank.
I mean, with the interest rates that you get in the savings bank accounts, you're sort of losing money every year to inflation.
So this podcast episode, as I introduced earlier, is all about getting young parents with young children to their first investment for their children. And we want to explore the various investment options available, figure out which is the best one that parents can go for, and take that leap to make that investment. Let's start with the very basics. What do you think are the financial goals a parent should have with respect to their child? What are the goals that we should start saving for and investing for?
This is such a common question that we get all the time, especially given that a lot of our clients fall into that age bracket where they are either considering having kids in the near future or already have kids. And it's a common problem that people sort of struggle with. So I think the first thing that I would want to do is explain what a goal is for the audience here, because people are not really sure what typically a financial goal means. So very simply put, a financial goal means a very big ticket purchase for which you need to plan for early. Right? It's not something that you can just fork out from your salary. So in the context of your kids, the biggest financial goal is essentially their university education. At a minimum, bachelor's. Obviously, if you can pay for your kids' masters, that's great. But at a minimum, you should be trying for saving up for their bachelor's, because they'll only have two options: either relying on you to finance their education or taking a loan, or the third option, which is pretty grim, which is not going to college at all. Right? So this is one, I would say, the most important goal that people should plan for. There are other things that come into play as well, right? I think one important thing that people sort of ignore, but it becomes quite a big factor, especially if you're living in tier 1 cities, if you want to send your kids to the top schools in your city, there is an increase in cash flow that happens from the moment that you get pregnant. So you need to cater for a surge in that cash flow. Right? So as a couple, as a financial unit, you need to make sure that your sort of salary can cater for that surge that's going to come really, really soon, right? And it's going to last for 18 years. The third important thing, which I think is often ignored, but is super critical, is risk management. Now, there is this concept of emergency funds. You should have some amount of money sitting in your bank or a fixed deposit where it's not exposed to risk. For most people, that guideline is anywhere between 3 to 6 months of your expenses should be there in completely risk-free instruments. But when you have a kid, that number actually goes up. Right? So you should actually target 6 to 9 months. Or if you have multiple kids, maybe up to 12 months of your money for your emergencies. And the last part for the risk management piece is insurance. Now, this is something that's again not on top of people's minds because they just don't foresee something like that happening to them. Right? It's not even about the probability, it's about the severity of something like that happening. So health insurance, and there are options like family floater plans where you can not just have yourself, but also include your kids. You should include your kids as soon as you can, which in India's case is when they become 3 months old. And that's super critical, Rinie, because, when as kids grow up, a lot of times there are certain conditions that develop early in life, and you don't want to leave your kid exposed to that risk, because they won't get coverage for that in the future if that does happen, right? And you and your spouse should definitely have a term insurance, because you need to ensure that, because your entire sort of financial planning is based on your incomes coming in consistently.
Yeah.
If any event affects that income, be it a bad illness, or be it a disability, or you just not being around, you want to make sure that they are taken care of.
So if I were to summarize it, the things that you're saying is the four things that we need to plan for in our finances. The first one is a university fund, which is a long-term big outflow. The second one is the monthly expenses that are going to go increase. You mean, you can look at monthly, you can look at annually, but annually you are saying it could
Yes.
be anything between like 1.5 lakhs to more. I'm talking in
Yes.
INR over here. If you're in a different country,
Absolutely.
then you have to account for it accordingly. The third
Yeah.
one is the emergency fund. And you anyway should have an emergency fund, but if you have kids, your emergency fund needs to be bigger and it needs to cover you for a longer period of time. And the last one is getting your insurances in place. So both health and life insurance, and getting your family onto these plans as fast as possible, especially your kids, so
Yeah.
that they have long-term coverage. So these are these four big buckets financially. We need to evaluate where we are at. And if
Yeah.
you are not, meeting these requirements, so that should be a primary focus for us, right? Like, let's move things around and let's do things to meet these four big financial buckets. Wow. Okay. This is just the first question, and so many things that I have learned just from this one question. But you know what? And I think I could do like multiple episodes with you. But for this episode, why don't we focus a bit more in the long-term goals? Let's talk about, those big outlays that we're looking at, which is university, master. So if you look at those long-term goals, when should we start investing for them? When they turn 5, 10, 15? How long do you think we need to save for those long-term goals?
With any sort of long-term financial goal, the earlier you start, the better it is, right? There's this very interesting saying that I love. There's only two kinds of people in this world: those that earn interest and those that pay interest. You want to be that person that earns interest. And with interest, there is this another very powerful concept called compound interest. And how compound interest works is basically, let's say you invest 100 rupees today, right? Let's say you get 10 rupees in return, 10% return. So now your money has grown to 110 rupees. Next year, you'll be getting your returns on the entire sum of that 110. So the returns that you'd be getting next year would be 11 rupees. And this kind of keeps growing exponentially, which is an extremely powerful force. So if we talk about a long term, right? If we talk about a 15-year time horizon or a 20-year time horizon, this becomes such a powerful force that your money multiplies multiple fold. Just to give you a small example of this, let's say hypothetical situation again, right? You're planning for your kid's education 18 years later, and you're just pregnant, or your kid is just born, right? I would say that's the most ideal time when you should start off. So let's say you need an SIP of 10,000 rupees to get to your goal. If you were to start just 10 years later, that means when your kid is 10 years old, when they are in sort of primary school, you would need to do a monthly SIP of 4 times that amount. So you would need to do a monthly SIP of 40,000 rupees at that
To
point.
get the same
Instead of
return.
to reach the same goal, to reach the same value, right? So that just tells you how important it is for you to make compound interest your friend early on and start as early as you can. I can't stress that enough.
Okay, so start as early as you can while you're pregnant, as soon as the kid is born. That is the main takeaway. But the thing is, how much? Let's say right now you threw a random number, right? You said 10,000 rupees.
Yeah.
How do we know what should be that number that we
Right.
need to save for? How do we know how much do we need to save on a monthly basis? How much do we need to invest on a monthly basis to get to whatever that goal should be? Like, how do we do all this calculation?
Even before I get to how much you should start saving on a monthly basis, I think it'll be good for us to talk about what is the goal that you're trying to get to in the first place, right? And I think there's a very easy thing that you could do. You all you need to do is just Google what is the average cost of a university degree right now. So let's say if I talk about the context of, so an engineering degree along with all the other supplementary expenses, including your living expenses for your kid, your sort of hostel fees that they have to pay, their food, etc., extracurriculars, everything adds up on average in India between 15 to 20 lakhs for a engineering degree.
Okay.
Now
All
let's
four
go
years.
all 4 years combined.
Engineering degree, all 4 years.
I'm talking about potentially going to non-private institute. If you were to want to send your kid to a private institute, now that number would almost double. So that number would go up to 30 to 40 lakhs. Now here's the kicker. We are talking about the cost of these degrees in today's value. Now everyone is familiar with the concept of inflation by now, right? So it basically means the increase in the cost of goods and services every year, right? And in India, for example, inflation is 6%. But did you know that inflation in sort of your college education is about 10%? So it's significantly higher than general inflation. So if you just talk about an 18-year time period, you're talking about these expenses tripling. So then going from 20 lakhs to 60 lakhs, then going from 40 lakhs to 1.2 crores. So you have to account for this inflation. And don't worry about this if the numbers seem very jarring to you. There are a lot of online calculators that you can actually use to actually project and see how inflation will affect sort of these fees over a period of time. And we'd be happy to link a few of these calculators. We have a few from CashVisory. Now let's go a bit global with this. So let's talk about doing the same degree in Singapore or the US. Now, Singapore would be significantly much more expensive as compared to India. In fact, the figure that 20 lakh equivalent in Singapore would be about 1 crore. Now, if you go to the US, it gets worse, right? That figure would go up to 1.5 crores to almost 2 crores. And mind you, we're talking about engineering right now. If you talk about other degrees like medical or law, those are even more expensive. Sometimes X of an 2x of a degree like an engineering or a commerce or business. So these are the sort of numbers that you need to account for, factoring in the probability of where your kid might be going to college and what degree they might be pursuing. One last thing here to add on with regards to you sending your kid abroad, and this is more extremely relevant to people who are in India. So inflation in a place like Singapore or the US might not be as high as India, right? Inflation in college education would be somewhere around 3 to 4%. But there is another factor that you need to consider while going global, which is the fluctuation between rupee and the dollar, right? Now, this is a trend that's not going to reverse anytime soon. So you can safely assume a 3.5 to 4% depreciation in rupee every year. So in effect, you're going to see a 7 to 8% inflation, even if you were to send your kid abroad, right? So these are factors that you need to really consider before determining what is the goal that you're targeting for. What is it that you want to save up?
So we first need to decide our own aspirations for our child.
Absolutely.
Like where
That's
do
the
we
right
aspire
word.
to
Yeah.
where do we aspire to send them, or at least what options do we want to be what options do we want should be open for our child? And I'll tell you with my own example. Like, so I did my schooling in Singapore, and very honestly, my parents couldn't have afforded to send me to the US or to the UK. So I never even
Right.
applied to these universities because maybe when I was growing up in India, my parents never aspired to a level that they need to send me to these countries. They never envisioned. But I think depending on where we are at right now and what our goals and aspirations are for our children, we can then decide on, okay, this is the country that we want to be prepared for. This is the kind of fee.
Yeah.
And then you kind of work backwards from there. But Utkarsh, I'll tell you, all
Absolutely.
these numbers that you said, oh my, I kind of get them. Like, I do understand that we need to, account for inflation and we need to account for currency differences. But these numbers are pretty jarring, like you said. I think what we will do, we will link these calculators down in the description of this video.
Okay.
I will leave it to you to give us the best ones, which are the easiest to use. I'm hoping CashVisory is one of them.
Absolutely.
So that we can do these numbers for ourselves and to get the final amount. I know it's going to seem like a lot of money. It's going to be like crores and crores of money, especially if you're aiming for education abroad. Can you make it less scary for us? Can you tell us how is it that we can start saving for that and investing for that so we're not intimidated by that goal? So what should we be doing every month to get to that massive financial goal of university education?
So we're going to be starting off with a bit of a sample number to simplify things. So let's go with that Singapore example. And let's say you want to send your kid to Singapore to study engineering, and that costs 1 crore today. Now, if you factor in that inflation piece that we talked about, that number would grow to somewhere around 2 crores roughly. So what is it that you need to save up every month to get to that goal? Well, you could calculate this very simply using the calculators that are there linked below. But to give you a number, it's about 30,000 a month. If you were to start right now, when your kid is just born. So over the next 18 years, you need to do an SIP of approximately 30,000. This number might be scary to some people. It might not be scary to some other people. Now I'm going to give you another hack to sort of make this better, right? Now, everyone by now knows what an SIP is. An SIP is a monthly investment where you put aside something every month and you forget about it. There is this concept called step up SIP, which is every year you increase your SIP by 10%. Now that really supercharges the concept of compounding for you. So instead of doing 30,000 a month when you're starting off, you need to do just 15,000 a month if you were to do a step up SIP. So you start off with 15,000. Over time, as your salary increases, you keep increasing that SIP by 10%, right? And then it'll become super easy for you to collect that 2 crores without even realizing what you've done.
And how does that step up work? Do we do the 10% step up every month or every year?
So you do that percent step up every year. And in fact, at CashVisory, we firmly believe in automating everything. So this step up SIP is actually an automated thing. So you don't need to do it consciously. But obviously, if you don't want to leave it to automation, you could even do that manually. In fact, if you have a higher bump in your salary, you could even increase it by a higher amount in a given year.
Got it. So let's say you start off in the first year, you're just doing 15,000 every month, which doesn't seem like a very scary number, to be honest. And then every year, you just keep stepping up by 10%. So like the next year, it will become 16,500. And then you do another 10%, and then it'll just keep on increasing as your personal income is increasing as well. 2 crores seems very scary. But yes, 15,000 doesn't seem scary. Thank you for breaking that down for us. Utkarsh, one thing that I've been itching to ask you is, so of course, I think we should definitely have SIPs, but one thing that I always wonder is, do you keep these SIPs for a goal separate from your other goals? For example, should you basically have one big pot of money, which a part of it's for your retirement, a part of it is for your first kid, a part of it for your second kid, a part of it for your next home, or do you have like individual instruments earmarked for every goal? What's the best way to go about organizing these investments?
Right. That's a phenomenal question, Rinie. And I think it's very, very pertinent for us to address this because there's 3 levels of financial planning. The first level is not planning at all. And we've all been there, done that. And the second level of financial planning is that you just start investing. So you're just setting money aside in either a bunch of mutual funds, it could be stocks, whatever instrument might float your boat. But the third level, supercharged version of financial planning is goal-based planning, where you're very deliberate about it. You have emergency funds set aside separately. You have money that's going separately for your shorter term goals, for your mid-term goals, for your longer term goals. Now, why is this separation important? Well, the first reason is because if your goal is, let's say, just 2 years away, you can't take any risk with that pool of money. You need it to be in a place that's secure. You need it to be in a place that's similar to a fixed deposit. It could be a very secure bond-based fund. Versus if a goal is, let's say, 4 to 5 years away, then you could go a bit more aggressive. You can add a bit more equities into it. But if a goal is, let's say, 18 years away, right? Time is on your side. So you can go a lot more aggressive with it. So how each of those portfolios for those goals, depending on how far away they are, would look very different. Now, how we sort of do this at CashVisory is you can actually select a particular goal. You can key in the amount that you need to save up for that goal in whatever time frame. It's going to create the specific portfolio for that goal. And when that money goes in, when that SIP goes in, it's going to go in as a separate bucket. And you're going to be able to manage it, see it separately. Now, this is super important because if you were to just put all of that money all together in one single bucket, first of all, this risk management would definitely not, you won't be able to control this as tightly as you would if they were separate. And more importantly, I think it's a psychological thing. When we see all that money together, we are more likely to spend it on something else rather than for the thing that we planned it for. Versus if you see, when you go to your sort of investment platform and you see that, okay, this is my child education fund, you will be more hesitant. Of course, if there's emergencies, you can go to it. But in most cases, you will let that be for your kid's future. So that psychological impact of bucketing is actually the most important reason why we recommend it.
Right, so you do recommend that we should save it in like different buckets. But what if outside of CashVisory? So I think CashVisory is amazing in the sense if you're able to see different buckets and it's able to create a portfolio based on the timeline that you have, right? For education you have 18 years, for retirement you have 40 years. So you have that differentiation in CashVisory. But what about outside of CashVisory? Where you maybe have like one demat account or IBKR account. Let's say I use IBKR for my investments. So you
Yep.
only have that one brokerage account. How do you differentiate in that? How would you keep money separately for your kids' education fund?
I can first answer this in the context of India. Because this is really easy for people to do it. So what you essentially do is you open a joint account with your kid. So your kid, obviously, when you're starting this, would probably be a minor. They would probably be below 18. So you would become sort of the custodian of that account. Essentially, what you're doing is you're opening a separate investment account or a separate demat account along with your kid. Now, the money or the investments into that account can go from your same bank account that you're using for all the other investments. But it's going to be in a separate place that, again, you've psychologically sort of bucketed. There's another sort of bonus that happens when you end up doing this, which is on the taxation side. So without getting too technical, let's say your kid has turned 18 now, and you want to start withdrawing money from this joint account that you have with your kid. Now, equity and debt funds are taxed slightly differently. Focusing on the debt funds piece, what essentially happens is when you withdraw that pool of money, it gets added to your taxable income for the year, right? Now, because your kid would be have turned 18 by then, and they would probably not have a source of income, they would not pay any sort of taxes on the capital gains on the debt funds at least that they have. So there are tax benefits if you were to sort of create that joint account with your kid and use that to do your longer term investments for their college. So this is in the context of India. Now, depending on the specific country that you're in, the dynamics might slightly vary. In some countries, you are able to create a joint account. In some countries, you are able to just create a separate account for your kid as well. So that answer would totally depend country to country, and you can always reach out to us, send in your questions, and we'd be happy to take that in the context of your own country.
Wow, amazing. So you're saying do keep the money separate, and you can do that simply by creating a joint account with your child and
Yep.
then creating a separate brokerage account for them as well. Firstly, of course, you get that understanding that, like, yeah, here I have to put 15,000, 16.5K, or, and then you keep doing the step up. And then you're able to see that money for that child separately. Would you
Absolutely.
recommend doing this separately for different children as well if you have more than one child?
Oh yeah, 100%, right? Because also one thing that happens is after your child turns 18, right, they would start to have more control over the account as well. So you don't want your other kids having control over their siblings' funds, right? So I would recommend doing it separately for each child, basically.
Fantastic. Okay, I need to go and create an account for my kid. That's the first thing that just came to my mind. I'm like, okay, I need to go and create an account for my kid, do all this calculation, then get started with investments in the brokerage account. So now, let's say I'm at a stage where I have created that account, right? I have the infrastructure in place. Now, what's the next step? Where do I put that money? Debt fund, equity fund, endowment plan, insurance policy, fixed deposit. There are so many investment instruments out there. It boggles my mind. And then in that confusion, you end up doing nothing. And you're just like, nahi hoga yaar, pata nahi kahan dalna hai. So please give us the best instruments that you think we should be putting our money into, assuming we have a 15 to 18-year timeline for that goal.
Got it. Given the fact that this is such a huge sort of decision paralysis, I'm going to do a bit of an elimination method. And I'm going to be sharing with you the rationale behind why I'm eliminating each investment vehicle. And then
Love
we'll
that.
finally get to our winner.
I know. I feel like we need to know what not to go for instead of just saying, because otherwise we'll be like, why did you eliminate the rest? So please tell us which one should be striking off our list.
So we'll start with the most obvious one, which is crypto, right? And the reason why it's important for me to address that, given the fact that a lot of young people right now have their entire portfolios in crypto. So while your risk profile might be super adventurous, do not put your kids' education to chance, right? And crypto is extremely volatile, and obviously your goal-based planning should not be into an instrument that you totally don't know what's going to happen. The second option that I'm going to be eliminating is property. Now I'm moving towards the traditional investment vehicles that people in India typically went for. So the reason why I'm eliminating property is because now a property is not liquid. That's the first issue, right? So let's say your kid needs to go to college next year. You liquidating that property becomes a big hassle, right? And it might not even happen in time for your kid to get to their college. But the bigger issue is that a property is not diversified. It's very hit and miss, right? So if you invest in one property and you get fantastic capital gains, good for you. But you don't know whether the specific property that you've invested in whether or not it will manifest and give you those returns. So you want to be in a place that's more predictable as opposed to more left to chance. The next one that I'm going to be eliminating is again a bit more obvious, because people in India typically consider fixed deposits to be an investment vehicle, but we don't believe fixed deposit is an investment vehicle. Simply because when you adjust it for taxes, fixed deposit just barely is able to meet inflation. Forget about beating inflation. And we've clearly established that inflation in your kids' education costs are higher than the normal 6% inflation. So a fixed deposit won't even be able to match that inflation. So you'll still be sort of losing money and you'll be getting further away from your goal rather than getting closer to it. The next one that I want to take on is insurance plans or endowment plans. Now, these plans, when they existed and when they came into the fold, they were well intentioned in the sense that, okay, if someone is not investing at all, get the insurance and investments all done together. But we at CashVisory are not the biggest proponents of those plans for two main reasons. One is they do come with huge amounts of lock-ins. So they take away from the flexibility that you have with that pool of money. But more importantly, they have very high charges. So on average, they will charge 3 to 4% in management fees and all the other charges that are there. So imagine investing in the same mutual funds through a ULIP versus investing it separately in the same mutual fund. Your returns would just diminish by 3 to 4% by virtue of doing that, right?
What's a ULIP?
And so ULIP is basically an investment linked policy or an investment linked insurance plan where you get the investment component and the insurance component together, right? Now, in a similar vein, endowment products have similar challenges. They were very popular in India until recently because people like the capital guarantee aspect that comes with it. They know that, okay, they will be getting some pool of money for sure. But there is a bit of ignorance that comes into play here. Now, in the markets, you can't really predict the returns that you're going to be getting over a 1 year or a 2 year time horizon, right? But over an 18-year time horizon, it's much easier for you to predict at least a range of returns that you'll be getting, like somewhere between 10 to 14%, very doable if you're investing for the longer run. So you, in essence, you don't need those guarantees, is the point that people have started understanding now. So with this elimination, what I come to, or what I'm left with, are mutual funds and ETFs. We believe that these are really the best instruments that you could use. First of all, they give you a lot of flexibility. They're totally customizable depending on your own risk appetite. So if you want to go very aggressive with it, if you want to go more balanced with it or cautious with it, you can determine the mix of different funds or different ETFs that you want to hold in order to get to that objective. And at the same time, a lot of these things can be automated with your SIPs, with your step-up SIPs, and one very, very interesting thing that people don't know about these mutual funds. Everyone knows about SIPs now, right? But not a lot of people know about SWPs, which are systematic withdrawal plans. So let's say, hypothetical situation, you're investing for your kid's education for 18 years and your kid is about to go to college next year. You could actually start withdrawing that pool of money on a monthly basis rather than doing it all at once. Because this is also a very common question that we get. When should I withdraw my money? Right? Because market conditions might be a factor there. So why not remove the timing there as well and start withdrawing that on a monthly basis? And also, you will not be using that money all at once. You'd be needing that money over a 3 to 4 year period. So your SWP can keep withdrawing your money on a month-on-month basis as and when you need it. So with these sort of different factors in play, with the sort of freedom and flexibility it gives you, to us, it's a no-brainer. Now, one last little, I would say, bonus tip that I would give to people, because there are certain tax-saving instruments that you could consider as well. And a very popular one in India specifically, for especially if you have a daughter, is a Sukanya Samriddhi scheme, which is basically a tax-saving instrument for your daughter, where you get tax benefits at the point when you put in the money, as well as at the point when you withdraw the money, and you get a 8% guaranteed return on that. So with the tax savings, it does make sense for you to go for something like that. The only caveat here is that these schemes again come with a really long lock-in period, which is anywhere between 16 to 21 years, which we are not the biggest fans of. So another alternative to that is, again, going back to mutual funds, there are tax-saving mutual funds as well. So you have the same benefit that you have in these schemes. You get the higher returns that you have in these mutual funds, but the lock-in period is just 3 years. So I would say, in a nutshell, mutual funds are a no-brainer, and tax-saving mutual funds are an additional hack on top of that.
Like, at the risk of sounding completely lost about this, because honestly, I think this investment space, there are thousands of mutual funds, and that is just like,
Absolutely.
if you just look at the India market, you look at the New York Stock Exchange, Singapore Stock Exchange, just the number just keeps on compounding.
Yeah.
So tell us, like, what are these tax-saving mutual funds that parents can look at?
So there are these basically tax saving mutual funds, which in India are called equity linked saving schemes. Right. So it doesn't matter which one you choose. And it's become relatively easy for people to choose that now. For example, if you go into CashVisory's platform, you will see one or two ELSS funds already selected for you. Now, as you rightly pointed out, Rinie, there are over 5,000 funds in the country, in India. And if someone were to go in to start filtering out and selecting these funds, it's a freaking nightmare because you don't know what to go for. So I want to give another hack for people who want to do this themselves. Whenever in doubt, go for an index fund. An index fund is nothing but a fund that basically tracks the top 50 or the top 100 companies in India, right? So you're basically not just betting on a particular fund, but you're betting on the growth of the Indian economy as a whole, right? Which is something that all of us at this point are bullish on. So going for
We're rooting for that.
we are rooting for that. So that's absolutely something that you could do. And when it comes to the tax saving ELSS funds, you could just go into a lot of these portfolio building platforms. So CashVisory is one of them. So what happens when you go into CashVisory or any of these sort of portfolio builders? The first thing that they'll ask you to do is do your risk profiling to understand what is the level of risk that you're able to take. And based on that, it's going to filter down and show you which funds are appropriate for you. So not just in terms of the ELSS or the tax saver funds, but also building the overall portfolio for you. Because it's not just equity funds that you need to consider. You need to look at bond funds. You need to probably look at some gold funds to build a holistic portfolio. So all of these things, the heavy lifting can be taken care of for you.
Wow. I mean, that's what we need. Like, because if you go to a typical brokerage account, whether it's DMAT for your bank or you go to IBKR, they just list out all the funds for you. They'll be like, buy what you want. But if you go through some of these financial advisory platforms, such as CashVisory, they do that filtering out for you. And then you can evaluate whether or not that is the right instrument for you, right?
Exactly.
Just putting some numbers out there, because you mentioned that we have been talking about numbers so far. So let's say for CashVisory, if I were to put my money in there with that education goal in mind, what are the kind of returns that we have a long run for these the education-based financial goals?
If I were to sort of talk about the returns that have been there in the near term, I think those numbers are a bit misleading. Even our own portfolio over the last 2 to 3 years has given a return that is north of 20% on average. And I'm talking about a balanced portfolio. But if I were to level set this over a 10 to 15 year time horizon, you should level set yourself around a 12% mark. That's a pretty good sweet spot for you to work towards. If you're someone whose risk profile is, let's say, more cautious, I would say look at a 10% value. If you're someone who's more adventurous, look at a 14% value, right? So a 10 to 14% range is a very good sweet spot for you to expect in the longer term, as long as your sort of portfolio is built the right way.
So this is the kind of returns that we are expecting on
absolutely
year by year basis.
Yes. So
am
yes,
I right
absolutely.
to say that?
Annualized returns, so 10 to 14% every year.
All right. Oh my God, so much I have learned today. I think this episode, somebody needs to have a notepad out and take lots of notes and build up their homework for the next few weekends, because doing this financial planning is something that we have to do. In our age group, in this 25 to 35 age bracket, like you said, if you're planning to have kids or you already have kids, you need to know your numbers.
Absolutely.
Because when your kid is 16 and then they finally say, hey dad, I think I want to go to Australia for my university, and then you look at your numbers, you're like, wait, I can't afford that. And then you get into this whole thing of like, loans and this and that, which then you will curse yourself. Then you'll be like, oh my God, I wish I had planned for this 15 years ago when I had the time to do it.
Precisely. And banking on the time machine being invented 16 years down the line is not a good strategy, guys. So do it while you still can, right? And kind of be regret free. And we're talking about, your kids here, who we sort of love unconditionally and we'll do anything for. So this is a minimum. This is, I think, the biggest show of love that you can do for your child is by planning early for their future.
Wow, love that. I think that's exactly something that we have to keep in mind. So, Utkarsh, I think we are armed with information right now, but like you pointed out in the beginning, it's the fear of taking action is what always stalls people and just keeps them from moving forward. So let's say, can you tell us how easy it is to get onto CashVisory, and what do we need and how fast can we start making our first investment?
going back to the point of you can either do all the heavy lifting yourself, and more power to you if you choose to do that. But always know that you have help available, right? That help might come from your friend or family who's really good at this, or it might come from professionals like ourselves who do this for a living, right? So we made the sign up process on CashVisory as simple and intuitive as it can be. So what it entails is doing a risk profile assessment, which is the first thing that we need to understand about you, which is how much risk taking capability do you have. The second piece of information that we get from you is what are your goals, what is it that you're saving up for, what is the time horizon that you have for that, so that those buckets can be created. So all of this that I'm talking about takes you less than 5 minutes to do. After that, obviously, just like any other financial app, you need to do your KYC. And so there are two kinds of profiles: people who have done their KYC in the past in any financial app in India. For them, the process is faster. Your account would be ready if you've done your KYC sometime in the past, almost immediately. So you can go from starting the process to starting your first investment within 15 minutes.
Okay, so that's great. So, I mean, that's the way to take action, right? You know where to go, you know exactly what to do, and then you jump right into it. Because, Utkarsh, if anything I have learned from you, and this is I want to tell everyone, is that for every intent and purpose, Utkarsh is my financial advisor. And one of the most important things that he has taught me is that investment is all about discipline. It has nothing to do with when you want to time yourself into the market. It is just about having the discipline. If you really listen to this episode, the word that he has been throwing around a lot is automated. You need to automate things, because if you trust yourself that every third of the month you're going to sit down and you're going to very religiously put money in every single fund, in this account and that account, believe me, you're not going to do it. I don't do it. That's why I have taken his advice and automated everything, so that without me even lifting a finger, I've got money getting deducted from my bank account, going into my brokerage account, and from my brokerage account, going into all the different funds that he advised me to choose. And that's how I have set up my entire investment portfolio, and I have him to thank for this.
Absolutely.
So if you have a PAN card and you are an Indian or an NRI, you have to get onto CashVisory to give yourself that discipline and those amazing returns that he has been talking about to really meet your financial goals.
Rinie, I can't tell you how proud I am right now, because that key takeaway of discipline that you mentioned, that's such an important insight, right? And I've seen your journey. I've seen you struggling with the same problems that I was struggling with initially, which is making that first investment. But once you did, you've not looked back. So that is something that I would say, I would recommend to everyone. It's not about timing the market. It's about time in the market. If you will be invested for a longer term, you know that your returns are going to be good. And automate, don't leave it to chance. You're definitely setting yourself up for a very bright future if you were to do that.
Sounds amazing. Thank you so much, Utkarsh. It was such a lovely conversation. And as we promised, we are going to link the financial calculators as well as the link to sign up to CashVisory in the description. So please have a look at it. Make your step towards your first investment and start saving and securing your child's future.